to be back. We had a good time in California. I got to speak a few times. The It's always great going to church when the pastor's gone and you have complete charge, and you can end whenever you want. We did have probably the worst weather we've ever had in all of our many trips, probably 40 or 50 trips to California. Um, it was just awful. The worst weather occurred a few hours after the election, after the inauguration on Friday, the 20th. We were down in Temecula, and the place we were at, the lights all went out, and it was just a horrible storm. It was right when the then ex-president Obama was trying to land at Palm Springs. They tried to land three times and couldn't do it, and they had to divert him to Riverside. And somebody finally sent me a text, said Obama decided to leave Palm Springs and the sun came out. But the whole time he was there, it was pretty awful. I played golf one day. It was the windiest round of golf I've ever played in my life. I mean, a club that I would hit 190 yards, if I hit it perfectly into the wind, would go 130. So that's what we would call a six-club wind. It was, it was hard to stand up. At one point, I parked the cart, didn't put the brake on. I turned around to walk, got out of the cart, and turned around. And the wind blew the cart back about 2 feet. It was crazy. So I did have a chance to talk with a lot of people, meet some people. I had a great time. It does seem, I will confess to you today that I have no idea if my slides are in order because there's just been so much that has happened in the past week that I think is prophetically significant. It seems as if, as this graphic demonstrates, that the world is about to pop. It is it certainly is divided. It's very, there's so much going on. It's really impossible to keep up. And I appreciate all the stuff that people send me. So don't be offended if I don't use what you send me. It's just that there's so much that if I put everything in that people send me, I would be here for a half a day, and it would take me 3 days to get it done. But we talked about the convergence of the signs. In fact, I went to a prophecy conference down at Maranatha Chapel. Went down to see Bill Koenig, and it was called, guess what? Convergence. We met with some people up in Sacramento that have a DVD coming out. I think you can get it online, or it's called thecomingconvergence.com. You might check that out, Brent and Carrie Miller. And it looks good. I know a lot of the people that are involved in that, and it's a very well done video. And I think that's out the end of February. And it talks about convergence. Everywhere I went, everybody was talking about convergence. And we've been talking about convergence for years here because of all the things that are happening. So let's look at a few scriptures again. Some of our stock scriptures, though. 2 Timothy chapter 3, this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. And it talks about the people in those last days. It says, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. For of this sort they are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. In 2 Timothy 4, for the time will come, talking specifically about people in the church, when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 17, talking about the teachers in this time. These are wells without water, clouds that are carried with a tempest, to whom the mist of the darkness is reserved forever. For when they speak great swelling words of vanity, they allure through the lust of the flesh, through much wantonness, those that were clean escape from them who live in error. While they promise them liberty, they themselves are the servants of corruption. For of whom a man is overcome, of the same he is brought in bondage. For if they have escaped the pollutions of the world through the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled therein and overcome. The latter end is worse with them than the beginning. For it had been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than, after they had known it, to turn from the holy commandment delivered unto them. But it has happened unto them according to the true proverb, the dog is turned again to his own vomit again, and the sow that was washed to her wallowing in the mire. Those are pretty stark words from the Apostle Peter. And I'm just going to give you some examples of things that fit within all of those verses and some things going on in the Middle East if we have time. Here's an interesting thing. Now, California is a beautiful state. There's wonderful people out there. There's people that love Bible prophecy. But there are leftist idiots all over the place. And so here there were major traffic jams in San Francisco on the Southern Bridge down there, San Mateo. Because why? They found on the bridge approach a hummingbird nest with an egg in it. It was less than the size of a fist. And so they have canceled or delayed for a number of weeks at the cost of tens of millions of dollars a construction project to improve the lane access on that bridge, assuming they don't find another one of these birds. And these are the people who believe in evolution, the survival of the fittest, right? So, the bird, if it's the fittest, it'll survive, right? I mean, but this is insanity that goes on out there on many levels. At the same time, this was good news this week. They did arrest around 500 people in a sting on human trafficking in Southern California. Picked up a lot of people, freed at least 25 or 30 people that were being held and forced into the sex trade. So that was good news. Today is the Super Bowl, and it's often been reported that the Super Bowl is the largest event in terms of human trafficking. To celebrate that, I guess, now that statistic, that thinking is disputed. There's an article in Sports Illustrated that disputes that this really goes on at the Super Bowl. The one thing I've noticed over the past couple of years is that whatever criticism we have of crazy left-wing people in the regular news media applies equally, if not more, with sports writers. They're losing their minds, and they're focusing on all these political. I mean, I just want to watch a sports game, okay? I don't want all the political thing, okay? I don't care if some guy kneels. I do care if he kneels, and I really care if the team doesn't do anything about it. That's what at the playing of the national anthem. But this is an article in Sports Illustrated saying, oh, this human trafficking thing, it's just a myth. So to prove that it's a myth, we're going to bring in probably one of the worst occultic-based singers, a disgusting individual, very talented though. She's classically trained. Lady Gaga will be doing the halftime show today. You should block your kids from the room during the halftime. It may be very innocuous. The last few have not been. Remember Madonna in Indianapolis doing that Iris or whatever goddess thing she was doing, and then Beyonce a couple of years. I mean, it's just the NFL is gone, in my opinion. I hardly can stand to watch it anymore, unless the Steelers are winning. Then it's okay. Well, to show some of the craziness, this is a publication from the British Medical Association. It's sort of the equivalent of the American Medical Association, is my understanding, in Great Britain. And this publication came out, and it's called A Guide to Effective Communication, Inclusive Language in the Workplace. So what they want to do is they want to tell doctors what kind of language they should use in dealing with their patients. Because, of course, doctors have no understanding on how to do this, and they don't if leftists are in charge, because things have changed. And so the opening paragraph page there is, why is language important? So look at just a few of the things. I mean, I could read you all 14 pages of this and you would be running from the room screaming, but listen to just some of this. The British Medical Association has said pregnant women should not be called expectant mothers, as it could offend transgender people. Instead, they should call them pregnant people so as not to upset intersex and transgender men, the union has said. Okay, now listen. You have got to have a lot of education to believe something like that. They have got to have control of you for 20 years, from grade school through college and med school, to beat common sense out of you at this level. Okay, and usually when I hear somebody say, I listen to Dennis Prager, I love Dennis Prager, and somebody will call him with just this crazy leftist notion about language or something, and his first question is what? What college did you graduate from, and do you have a master's degree? Because usually they do, because they've had the common sense beat out of them. Listen to this. The elderly should be referred to as older people. Disabled lifts should be called accessible lifts, and someone who is biologically male or female should be called assigned male or female. Now, when they talk about dealing with pregnant women, there is this next phrase, this next page, and this is a quote. This is a direct quote from this publication for all British doctors. Gender inequality is reflected in traditional ideas about the roles of women and men. Though they have shifted over time, the assumptions and stereotypes that underpin those ideas are often deeply rooted. And now the coup de grace. A large majority of people that have been pregnant or who have given birth identify as women. In fact, here's the idea. They all are women. In the history of mankind, 100% of people who've given birth on the human side of things have been women. They cite one example of a man who is going through a woman who is trying to turn herself into a man, she wanted to have a baby to feel what it was like before she became a man, because she knew when she became a man, she wouldn't be having a baby. They need to listen to her. She's a woman. This is insanity. And we can include intersex men and trans men who may get pregnant by saying pregnant people instead of expectant. Well, that I must have gone back. Oh, no, that's right. A large majority of people that have been pregnant or have given birth identify as women. This is anti-science. What the left does is they project onto other people their idiocy. For example, they will say, oh, if you believe in creation, you're anti-science. No, 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 no. I love science. I drive a car. I use a computer. And I believe those things work. But they are the ones who are anti-science because they deny the basic fact of life that people are born, and there are a few rare exceptions, I'll grant you that, male or female, because that's the way God created them. They're the anti-science people. They project, and you're going to see some projection in some of the video clips I have in just a moment. Now, The Atlantic came out with an article around the time of the Women's March, the day after the inauguration. I guess it would have been 2 weeks ago. And it was this: how the ultrasound pushed the idea that a fetus is a person. And there's this long article in the Atlantic. It's really one of the better left-leaning publications that I look at, but this article is insane. And so what she was trying to do is she's trying to undermine the use of ultrasound in pregnancy. Because why? Because there are bills pending in a lot of legislatures that if ultrasound detects a heartbeat, the woman's right to choose is going to be restricted, to kill the baby, the person, the fetus, the real person that's in there, the separate person, a separate personality, separate DNA, all that stuff from the mother. If the ultrasound detects a heartbeat, and we've heard of the heartbeat bills, then they're restricted in killing the child. So the article is this. Listen to a few things from here. First of all, it's under this thing, Party of Science. The technology, it says, has been used to create an imaginary heartbeat and sped up videos that falsely depict a response to stimulus. Now, I'm sure we have one lady here who's had, what do you have, 18 children, 7 children? And I'm pretty sure she would testify that that thing in there moves. Okay? You know, the baby, I mean, I've heard this, the baby just moved, you know. It's not made up. This is a lie. This is somebody who's so steeped in leftism that they've lost the ability to reason. They've been given over to a reprobate mind. So, how ultrasound became political. So one person responds, before ultrasounds, a woman had to wait until delivery. This is a response to the article, somebody tweeted, had to wait until delivery to find out if she was getting a puppy, a goat, or a human. That's called mocking the other person. That's pretty good. Opponents of the heartbeat bills have pointed out that they would eliminate abortion rights almost entirely, making the procedure illegal around 4 weeks after fertilization, before many women realize that they are pregnant. These measures raise even more elementary questions. What is a fetal heartbeat, and why does it matter? Doctors do not even call this rapidly dividing cell mass a fetus until 9 weeks into pregnancy. Yet the current debate shows how effectively politicians have used visual technology to redefine what counts as life. Guess what? It is life. The doctor comes in, she has her test, you're pregnant. What does that mean? You have a baby inside of you, a real person. I need to get one of those head pounding things. Ultrasound made it possible for the male doctor to evaluate the fetus without female interference. So it's a male. Males are using this. Are there not female OBGYNs? Female general practitioners that do this? In the Federalists, they have this: abortion science, heartbeats are imaginary, unborn babies aren't alive, and ultrasounds are just tools of the patriarchy. And this is the Federalist response to that ridiculous article in the Atlantic. Weigel's anger is not limited just to medical imaging technology, though. She's also extremely upset at the way social media allows newly pregnant moms to share their joy over the internet. Like pictures like this, which look remarkably like a baby. In many ways, social media have heightened the social reality of the unborn, Weigel writes, before sneering at the women who happily post pictures of their unborn babies on Instagram or Facebook, thereby promulgating the horrific notion that the babies growing inside them are actually babies growing inside them. Back to the article. This article, by the way, this article originally stated that there is no heart to speak of in a 6-week-old fetus. In fact, the heart has already begun to form by that point in pregnancy. And what happened was there was a whole bunch of, the Atlantic put this article up, and then they had a whole page of corrections to correct but they kept the article up because nobody ever reads the corrections. They only ever read the article. In connection with the Women's March, the next week there was the pro-life march on Washington, a very large demonstration. It didn't get anywhere near the coverage that the Women's March had the day after the inauguration. And there were hundreds of thousands of people there. Kellyanne Conway came over and gave a great speech. She's a mother of 4 children. I think she's got twins around 12 and then 2 younger children. And she's very committed to raising them. And my understanding is she's a Christian, an evangelical Christian. I'm not sure about that. This is what I've heard. And her speech that she gave at the pro-life rally would indicate that she was. But in response to the pro-life rally came this tweet from a lady named Shauna Nyquist. Now, why would I pick Shauna Nyquist? Listen to what she says. Then I'm going to tell you who her mother and father are. Because she claims to be an evangelical. My pro-life perspective includes immigrants, refugees, people of color, Muslims, and LGBTQ community, and means I oppose torture and death penalty. Now, this was tweeted on the day of the pro-life rally, or the day before the pro-life rally. And who is Shauna Nyquist? She is the daughter, married daughter, of Bill and Lynn Hybels of the Willow Creek Association. They have started a church in the Chicago area under the auspices of the Willow Creek Church. And she was doing this. I like what the person said below, John Lomperis, Shauna Nyquist, during rallies for Muslims, LGBTQ, etc., do you make anti-abortion statements, or is this just trolling the March for Life? And the answer is that's a rhetorical question. Obviously, she's trolling the March for Life. Janet Medford's got a great show. She says this: I've seen liberals ruin more churches than I care to count. Same pattern, social justice, then entropy, then eventual apostasy every time. And she's right. The social justice movement is killing the church, and we're seeing it on steroids with the Trump ban on temporary ban on immigration from 7 countries while we get things in place. The countries identified by the Obama administration as countries where there is a problem. So Trump said, we'll take 90 days to get something in place. And what's happened? Meltdown across the left. Look at some of these headlines. In Time, the resistance rises with those ridiculous pink hats that they did at the Women's March, which was to protest Donald Trump's vulgar statements about women. And how did they protest it? By dressing up as anatomically correct female private parts. It was ridiculous. And so the state of resistance. Californians' plans to fight Trumpism is a dreaming. It wants to leave the country. To which somebody said, well, I guess we're going to need a bigger wall, a longer wall. Now, this is right after the inauguration, Chris Matthews talking about, and since I haven't been around here for a couple weeks, some of this is a little bit older. This is Chris Matthews talking about Donald Trump. Now, the video you will like, because the video is a picture of Obama flying away in a helicopter. So that's one of the reasons why I included it. But you'll hear Chris Matthews talking.
When he said today, America first, it was not just the racial, the Hitlerian background to it. But it was the message. I kept thinking, what does Theresa May think of this morning when she picks up the papers and says, oh my God, what did he just say? He said America first. What happened to the special relationship?
Okay, now what's he trying to do? He's trying to turn Trump into Hitler. That's what he's trying to do. And listen, stop with the Hitler comparisons, okay? They rarely work. We have checks and balances in this country. They just don't work very well. So he says, well, boy, he said America first. I wonder what Theresa May thinks about this. Well, I'll tell you what. Magic of video. Let's find out what Theresa May thinks about it.
What did you make of his inauguration speech? Well, I think his inauguration speech had a very clear message to it, which is the message that he gave during his campaign about putting America first. But if you think about it, any leader, any government, as we do here in the United Kingdom, when we look at any issue, we ensure that we're putting UK's interests and the interests of British people first.
That's right. Most countries do try to put their people first, right? It's not, she's not a fascist. Not a Hitler. I do the same thing. So what the problem with Chris Matthews is, when Obama came, the thrill went up his leg, and as Obama's flying away in the helicopter, the thrill's going down his leg, and it short-circuited his brain, I think. So that's my scientific explanation for it, because I'm not anti-science. The women who speak for women, this women's march was a stunning thing. One of the ladies that was there was a lady named Donna Hilton, okay? And what happened was there's a clip on the internet where Cecile Richards, the head of Planned Parenthood, by the way, they did a survey. Remember, Planned Parenthood says, well, we help women with prenatal care and we provide so many services more than abortion and all this stuff. Guess what? So what did somebody do? They called every Planned Parenthood outlet in the country, 97 of them, and they asked them, do you provide prenatal care for women? How many do you think said, well, sort of? It was, I think, 5. So what's that, 5 out of 97, let's call it 6.5%. And a lot of them, they ask questions about ultrasound, and what do you use ultrasound for? And it's just to determine whether a woman's pregnant. It is an abortion provider pretty much 100%. Few exceptions sneak through. So Cecile Richards and all these people get out. I want to tell you about abortion not being the primary thing of Planned Parenthoods. Here's the conclusion that you can draw from the evidence. They're liars. They have lost the ability to reason and tell the truth. They have been given over, as Romans 1 talks about it, to that reprobate mind. God, there's a point at which God just said, I'm done with you. And as we look around the world and culture right now, we need to be aware that this is the time when God's going to be saying, I'm done. I'm done with you. It's over. And God does that. He did that with Israel many times. And by his grace, he, brought them back. But we're at that point. We're going to see it more and more. So here is Donna Hilton speaking at the women's conference, and listen to what she says.
My name is Donna Hilton. I'm formerly known as inmate 86G0206. 5 years ago, I was released from prison after serving 27 years.
She was in prison for, what did she do? Now, she's a featured speaker at this conference. Is that gal that's doing the interpretation? Oh, she's wearing one of those stupid hats, okay. But I won't name that. You know what the hat I'm talking about. And so she and 3 other women kidnapped a gay male. They tortured him. They took a 3-foot rod and rammed it up his backside. He died. And she spent she should have been in prison for life. Now she is a featured speaker because she's gay at this women's rally. Can you imagine if somebody like that had ever spoke at, say, a Trump rally? The outrage. But she was applauded. The other thing that was apparent at that rally was the hijab that people, they were wearing the headscarves. And in fact, I'm not a regular reader of Women's Running Magazine, but here's Women's Running Magazine. What? The ladies wearing a hijab. And they're mainstreaming this, even though there's terrible things. I don't have time to go into this about child bride mother in Nigeria, a Muslim young gal who was forced into. But listen, the response of the left, of course, Roger Moore stands out front of the Trump Tower saying, "We are all Muslim." Madeleine Albright says, "I was raised Catholic, became Episcopalian, and found out later my family was Jewish. I stand ready to register as Muslim in solidarity." She was Secretary of State for all 8 years of the Clinton, wasn't she? That was a train wreck, wasn't it? In England, and this is becoming common, there were 2 terror-related imams that gave a prayer at the inauguration, prayer meeting the next morning at the National Cathedral. In England, they're doing these interfaith prayer services. I don't have time to go into them. There was a man who is one of the Queen's chaplains. He has spoken out against this. He's Anglican, and he has resigned and continues to speak out that, listen, this is just nonsense. We cannot do this. But in this case, the clergyman in the Scottish cathedral, the one that led to the Queen's chaplain resigning, he said he defended it. And he was criticized, and some people wonder why he was criticized. But then here's a picture from just yesterday or 2 days ago about interfaith prayer services with Muslims that are taking place among people who claim to be Christian and evangelical all over the country. Here's a tweet that somebody put out from the Oregon-Idaho Methodist Conference. "Love your neighbor as yourself. Pray to support Muslims." American Thinker has a good article on this. "A deep hatred and rejection of Judaism and Christianity are hardwired into Islamic doctrine, including the Quran. Many of its chapters are incorporated into mandatory daily Islamic prayer. The very first Quranic chapter, considered the most exalted of all chapters, is a prayer directed to Allah, asking him to keep Muslims away from the misguided paths of the Jews and Christians. This chapter is a necessary part of the 5 mandatory daily prayers and is recited not once but anywhere from 17 to 100 times a day by devout Muslims, or 6,200 to 36,500 times per year." It is that verse at the National Cathedral, right after a lady sung "How Great Thou Art," an imam who was the former head of the Islamic Society of North America from Indianapolis, a non-indicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation terror funding trial, the largest terror funding trial in American history, got up and read that verse in the National Cathedral. Now, I've heard that the president is upset, but what distresses me greatly is that there were a number of people there, and nobody said, "I don't want anything to do with that false nonsense." Evangelicals. I mean, look, it would be the last time you're invited, okay? But, you know, go out swinging, I guess is the way that to look at it. So Trump puts in this border thing. Netanyahu tweets, President Trump is right. "I built a wall along Israel's southern border. It stopped all illegal immigration. Great success, great idea." So Trump's talking about building a wall. And there's all these articles. And it's hard, I have to tell you, it's very, very difficult to keep up with what's going on in the Trump administration, because they're just Trumpian shock and awe. That was a headline from either the Wall Street or the New York Times. Daniel Henninger said, "Too many political forces are coming to life against the young presidency." I mean, people are going crazy. There was this article, Wall Street Journal, headline, "Trump taps Gorsuch for High Court." I think he's a pretty good nominee. Look, you never know for sure, okay? The leftists, they never waver on their ideology. Unfortunately, conservatives will. They're just not as ideologically pure as they need to be. But by and large, this guy is, I think, a very good to even tremendous pick, as some people have said. So he's tapped. So what is the New York Times headline? Well, of course, the New York Times is going to say Trump taps Gorsuch for high court, right? Trump's court pick sets up political clash. And this is the way they're doing it. And the Democrats have been very mature. This is the Democratic side of the committee, of the Senate Finance Committee. They're just not showing up. And so the Republicans have changed the rules that used to be you had to have at least one Democrat there to do anything. So they just stay away. So stop their paycheck or something, or get the sergeant at arms as one person. Go out and drag them in. You know, drag them in their, well, put a heavy winter coat on Nancy Pelosi. So, well, she's not on the Senate though. So, the president has promised to get rid of the Johnson Amendment. I think that's a good thing. These reports, Trump's bluntness rattles world leaders. They're not used to it. It's like they've never heard anybody talk like this. I mean, because why? Because like the university with all of its safe spaces, international diplomacy has been a safe space for people who used to be at the university and have never really held real jobs in their lives. And so now they have a guy who comes in who's actually held a real job. Yeah, and you may not agree, and I don't, give him a lot of props for some of the things that he's done, but he's actually done something like built things, like built big buildings and that type of thing. And by the way, this is a sidebar. When I go to New York, they're putting up an 80-story building, and what do? They put up a little scaffolding, and they put a piece of plywood over the sidewalk right next to where they're building. Because, if the crane falls over, the plywood's going to protect you. But in Columbus, we built a 3-story building, and they take 4 stories out of the street down. I mean, I can't drive downtown hardly anymore because there's no lanes left because they're building buildings on both sides. So now, I may have to get a bike. I don't know. I'm ranting. It does bother me. I just don't understand this. In Trump's Washington, nothing feels stable. That's Peggy Noonan. He's moving down to Dodd-Frank. The Uber CEO was on his president's council, and the poor babies out there in the safe space of Silicon Valley demanded that he withdraw from the president's council because he said, I don't support everything that he does, but he's trying to help build the economy. I'm trying to build the economy. And he had to quit. He quit. This is maybe one of the most important things this week. There are encryption apps. I have a number of them that I use to communicate with people securely so that prying eyes can't really follow what's going on. But now people in the federal government are using those apps to set up resistance to doing things that the president wants to have done. My view, anybody caught using one of those at work, you're fired. Drain the swamp, get rid of these people, and so you pray that the president can get through his agenda, pray that his agenda is right, pray that he gets through his agenda, and pray that these people, they need to go. And the State Department is a huge one. The IRS is a huge one. We know what's been going on there for years. And this is all part of this fact that he wants to make America great. This is what the globalists, this is the cover of the Council for Foreign Relations recent publication, Foreign Affairs, the future of the international system. Because Trump is shaking that up, and people want a globalist agenda. Now, this is a little bit of a long clip, but I want you to listen to it because Caroline Glick, you can follow her on Facebook, and she does these little videos with a guy named Avi, and they just talk about politics and geopolitics and that type of thing. And this one is really good because I think that Caroline has really nailed the essence of why there is so much resistance to Donald Trump, to America, and to Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu. I think this is brilliant. Now, he's going to start off talking about the fact that he was up at Amona that morning. That's a settlement in I think it's in Samaria or Judea. They call it the West Bank improperly, but he was up at Amona, and they're moving the people out of Amona because they say they're illegal settlements and that type of thing. So Avi's going to talk a little bit about what he learned at Amona and then they're going to talk about why is this happening.
I just now came back from Amona, and anyone who's following the news sees that the army just closed off Amona, just sealed off Amona. No one's allowed to go, and I just got out. Now, let me tell you something. This is what's bothering me, and I'd love to hear your insight. When I was there, someone showed me an old cistern, thousands of years old, and an old wine factory, thousands of years old. It's ours. It's Jewish land. It's Jewish land. And it's because of an illegal occupation by the Jordanians and fictitious paperwork that maybe someone has ownership over this, and we're the only ones who recognize this fictitious Jordanian law. What? Wow. And yet people in America are silent about this, and they're complaining about a fake Muslim ban. Help me out here. That's where I'm at, asking me how I'm doing.
So look, in Israel, it's funny. A friend of mine was looking at the newspaper the other day, and she said, "Look at these crazy headlines. What, uproar on Trump's ban or whatever, his 90-day pause on immigration from 7 countries that were chosen by the Obama administration. Netanyahu refers to the media as Bolshevik leftist. This, that, and the other, and going on and I said, it's just like the headlines in the United States, because basically what you have here with Amona, what you have with Trump and the uproar against him by the left, is you have a fight over whether you can have national self-determination or not, whether nations are allowed to determine their own course as nations and advance their policies that advance their national interests. And you have a very loud, empowered, post-national, anti-nationalist, globalist left that uses all of the tools at their disposal, the media, the judicial brigades, whomever, bureaucrats in the United States, the IRS, to impede the ability of the people in Israel, in the United States, and of course we see it in Europe, to actually implement policies that advance their national interests. And everywhere you go, it's like the same story, that the people who are elected have no power, and the people who are not elected and force their appointments upon the elected are the ones who are calling the shots. For me, the best news coming out of Washington really over the past week, which has been a week of extraordinary news with the new Trump presidency, is that he just fired his acting attorney general, right? Because she said that his executive order was unconstitutional, which it manifestly is not. And the whole uproar against...
But why is it manifestly not?
Because the president has the right under the Constitution to determine U.S. immigration policies. It's very clear. I mean, my friend and colleague Andy McCarthy wrote about this in National Review, and it's a slam dunk case. I mean, they have no argument against him from a constitutional perspective. And, it's the same thing with our Supreme Court overturning all of these Knesset laws that are supposed to determine what we do with illegal aliens who come in here, infiltrate our borders from Africa, and then say that they're, that they're running away from something, and therefore we have to give them citizenship and everything else and free insurance and blah, blah, blah. No, we don't. I'm sorry, we have a border. The fact that you stole across it doesn't mean that you get the rights of an Israeli citizen. Why should you? I didn't work my whole life and pay all of my taxes in order to support you and your criminal clan that are all coming here illegally. What the heck? It's not my responsibility. But then comes in the Supreme Court of the State of Israel and time after time after time bars the Knesset from doing anything about it. It says everything that they do is unconstitutional. And by the way, Israel has no constitution. It's all made up.
Right.
And it's the same thing as these poor people in Amona, right? They've been living there for 20 years, and the international left, paid for by the European governments are funding these NGOs that are registered in Israel that are then working hand in glove with the radicalized courts and the radicalized attorney generals to submit petitions saying that Jews have no right to live in the cities that they built 40 years ago, in the homes that they built 25 years ago, because there's, a sliver of land that's of questionable ownership. But by the way, they can't even prove that it belongs to them. But that's okay, because based upon the sliver of doubt as to whether or not all 100% of the land that this house has been standing on for 20 years without anybody having any problem with is completely by the book state land or not. And for that, you're throwing families out of their homes, you're destroying communities for nothing.
Right.
And it's all because we have this problem in the West that, Israel is very much, at the pinnacle of this left-wing opposition to the nation state, right? I mean, we are sort of ground zero of their attempt to destroy the whole concept of the nation state. Because if you can say that Jews have no right to the land of Israel, you can say anything. I mean, there's no
one has any right anyway.
Ever. I mean, we developed the whole concept of a nation. We developed the whole concept of a national homeland, 4,000 years ago.
Right.
And everybody knows it. So that's why it's so important for them to disavow the right of the Jewish people to our homeland, because if we have no right to it, then nobody does. And you can tell the Americans that, that they shouldn't be allowed to have English as their national language, and that the Americans stole all of their land from Mexico, and I don't know why. Because obviously, if you can do it to the Jews in Hebron and in Jerusalem, Phra and Eli, in Shiloh, where Joshua divided the tribes and the tabernacle stood for over 1,000 years. If all of these areas are illegally occupied land of a people that came into existence 40 years ago because the KGB invented it,
She's talking about the Palestinians, just in case.
Right. I mean, then you can tell if you can get people to believe this, then they'll believe anything.
Right. So things are not stopping with Trump. One headline after another headline after another. Hey, is it going to stop? Is this what we're going to be seeing? Are we going to have 4 years of this?
I hope so. Look, I mean, right now, the thing that I'm most distressed about is that the Senate is not voting on his cabinet picks. I mean, somebody wrote today, well, what do you think? How is he supposed to do anything other than govern by Twitter when nobody's giving a vote for his attorney general and for his secretary of state and all the rest of him? He has no cabinet. He's supposed to enact, reform of the Obamacare fiasco, but they're not approving his Health and Human Services secretary. So, it's possible that we're just going to keep getting these tweets until they get tired of it and allow him to have a cabinet. I don't really know. But at least he doesn't look like he's backing down on anything except, of course, Jerusalem, which, as I said, would
probably
be a
our fault.
disaster. It's all,
Okay, she's referring to, it seems he's backed off settlements in Jerusalem, but you need to go to her Facebook page. She had a good analysis of that. I don't know if I have time to look at it this morning because I'm not even halfway and the clock seems to be moving even quicker. So look, here's a protest. This is a protest of the immigration ban, of the immigration delay. Who's protesting? Well, it's hard to tell now because of all the interfaith prayer services going on. Listen, let me say this. Interfaith prayer services are practice for the penultimate interfaith service, which will be held on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem by a man known as the Antichrist. That abomination of desolation will be the penultimate interfaith service of human history. So our role here is, I'm pretty sure Pastor Steve will back me up on this. You can just shout amen or whatever. We're not going to participate in those interfaith services because it waters down the message. And if we go, we'll go one time and make sure we don't get invited back. Because there's things that need to be said. So look, pray for Caroline, pray for Avi. I love these people. They're so clear in the way they speak the truth. Her analysis is right on. This is a globalist agenda against the nation state. And the two big ones to get rid of, the same ones that the Muslims want to get of, the little Satan Israel and the big Satan America. It's the way it is. It's a leftist global agenda, often funded. These things funded, these interfaith things that are going on. The organization funded by Open Society Foundations, which is an arm of George Soros. So Tucker Carlson had a discussion with someone who runs an immigration group, and I'm just going to play a clip of this. I have to say, right now, Tucker's doing a great job. He's replacing whoever that, what was her name? Don't say it. Don't say it. But whatever her name was, she's gone on to NBC or whatever. He's relentless. I mean, he'd be a great lawyer. I don't know if he is a lawyer. I mean, he seems smart enough to be to me. But here's his interview with this guy.
But you're not answering the question, which is, how do I know which refugees need to come here if I'm going to apply the American values that you're referring to? Like, what are the rules? If you're going to run around with moral statements like, oh, you're a bad person because you're against refugees, tell me what the rules are so I can be a good person.
Yeah, the rules are that you need to welcome those people who need protection. The United States needs to play a role. You see, the United States is a leader in refugee protection. And what makes us a leader isn't the number that we take. It's the way that we treat refugees when they come here. When a refugee comes to the United States, he's not known as a refugee. We don't put them in camps. We welcome them as new Americans.
In camps? No, we spend a lot of money on them, huge amounts of money on them, as you know. We spend a lot of money in your organization, which takes a lot of tax dollars.
Oh,
but here's my,
Tucker,
I'm not arguing against
if you're
that.
going to raise that, Tucker, I'm glad you raised that. I'm really glad you raised that.
I wasn't attacking you. I'm merely saying we're very generous. That's the only point I'm making, and I think we should be.
Let me tell you how generous
you are not answering the question, which is, in a world where there are tens or hundreds of millions of people who are fleeing all sorts of awful things, life or death situations, how do we know what our obligation is? You've said we have an obligation. You do this for a living. You've thought a lot about it. You're a smart guy. Tell me so I can evaluate all future policies through that lens.
Right, well,
and you're dodging it.
Well, first of all, Tucker, you just said my organization takes a lot of tax dollars, so I'm obligated to respond to that.
Okay, how do we know when we have an obligation to let someone in? Why not let all 60 million in? Do we have an obligation to do that? And if not,
No,
why not?
absolutely
60
not.
million fleeing from harm. Why don't we have an
Absolutely
obligation
not.
to let them in?
We have an obligation to see how can we play a role. Every refugee wants to be a citizen.
You're not going to answer any of my questions.
No, I'm going to eventually.
And he never did. So, and every interview that Tucker has with people from the left, and look, there's all these Christians running around, and if you don't bring in every refugee, Jim Wallace is out there, on behalf of sojourners. He's a leftist. He's a Marxist. If you don't bring all these refugees in, you're not Christian. Okay, Jim Wallace, I know you make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from your Christian organization. How many are at your house? Okay? Show me. Or otherwise, just, can I say shut up this time? Shut up. My wife always tells me not to say that, but I'm saying it this time. In Paris, this is a big story. A guy with a machete tried to attack a military patrol that was around the Louvre, the great art museum in Paris. One, I think it was the Daily Mail in London, put up a headline that the military police there had shot a man with a suitcase. And I think they meant that the man was carrying a suitcase, not that they used a suitcase to shoot him, but this is a big deal. This guy just attacks him. He'd been in Paris for like a week, came from Egypt. How did he do this? Now, I know the New York Times has a lot of trouble with their news, but they have to tell some facts to stay in the news business, okay? So you have to put your filter on. There's a very good article this morning on the front page of the New York Times that says, "Not lone wolves after all, how ISIS guides world's terrorist plots from afar." Now, this is the newspaper, along in conjunction with the Obama administration, that every time there was one of these attacks, what did they say? Lone wolf, no connection, no connection. They've gone and analyzed these attacks, and guess what they found out? That in almost every case, with a few exceptions, they have been directly controlled over the internet through encrypted apps, by the way, by ISIS. ISIS has an extensive network using encrypted apps, and some of these people, for example, here's the attacks. Now, they exclude San Bernardino, Orlando, and Istanbul, and I think that's a mistake. But all these other attacks that have taken place over the last couple of years, they've been directed or enabled directly by ISIS through these encrypted apps on their smartphones and computers. For example, this guy was arrested on the left in Rochester. He was going to, I don't know, blow up a movie theater or something. They found he was directed by ISIS from Syria, from the caliphate, the country that we pretend is still called Syria. Remember that. And this priest that was stabbed to death in the northern part of France, that as the guy's going up there to do the stabbing, he's getting direction from his ISIS and handler and enabler. So all of this stuff that Obama and Hillary Clinton and John Kerry and the guy, the Homeland Security, all of this stuff at Lone Wolves was a big fat lie. And now there's a new sheriff in town that's going to do something about it. By the way, back with the immigration thing, I think this judge's order that from out in Seattle or Portland is going to be overturned. It wasn't overturned by the Court of Appeals on an emergency basis. They rarely do that anyway. I just tried an injunction case. I know what the standard is for an injunction, and I'm telling you, I doubt whether the state of Washington has standing. I doubt whether the state of Oregon has standing, the ability to sue and bring this to the court. I think it's a terrible decision. I think it'll eventually be overturned, but it's going to take some time. And you want to get this Gorsuch guy in place before it gets up to the Supreme Court. Let me tell you that for sure. So in Germany, a man who set off a bomb outside, this is New York Times this morning, a man who set off a bomb outside a concert and a teenager who assaulted train passengers with an axe. You remember those stories? Were both chatting with handlers until minutes before their attacks. The teenager's handler urged him to use a car instead of an axe. The damage would be much greater, the handler advised, but the young man said he did not have a driving permit. I want to enter paradise tonight, he said, according to his transcript obtained by a German newspaper. And in Foreign Affairs, back in September, Bridget Mooring had an article on ISIS virtual puppeteers. Listen to her concluding paragraphs. Qassem, this is one of these ISIS guys, roles almost certainly replicated throughout ISIS, with dozens of virtual planners organizing operations around the world. Small-scale attacks should not be immediately labeled as lone wolf attacks, a term which disregards the potential for remote guidance from ISIS commanders in Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere. Moreover, although ISIS' loss of its territorial holdings is crucial to eroding the organization as a whole, it will undoubtedly find new ways to adapt, and the use of virtual partners is a strategy the group can use over the long term. Virtual planners can operate from anywhere, armed with only a computer and an internet connection. As the coalition continues to defeat ISIS on the ground, we must keep our sights on its operatives in the online space and prepare to see attacks in the West long after the fall of the caliphate. By the way, why didn't Hillary Clinton use an encrypted app and we wouldn't have all these problems? Sorry, a lot of train of thoughts going on here today. The Nation, a leftist magazine, comes out, why we support Keith Ellison for Democratic National Committee chair. Leaked draft, they're blowing their minds over at The Nation and other left-wing magazines. Leaked draft of Trump's religious freedom order reveals sweeping plans to legalize discrimination. He's going to implement the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And so this is a thing that The Nation got. This is part of the supposed draft, and they're just going crazy. Look at what it says. Language in the draft document specifically protects the tax-exempt status of any organization that believes, speaks, or acts or declines to act in accordance with the belief that marriage is or should be recognized as the union of one man and one woman. Sexual relations are properly reserved for such a marriage, male and female and their equivalents. Refer to an individual's immutable biological sex as objectively determined by anatomy, physiology, or genetics at or before birth, and that human life begins at conception and merits protection at all stages of life. They're going berserk because Trump actually wants to put that into practice. So praise the Lord for that. Now listen, don't get complacent though, because the world hasn't changed. It's gotten worse. Georgetown University law professor just went crazy. I'm going to take at least 10 more minutes, so if you have to leave, go ahead. Okay, the riots in Berkeley. I have friends who were there and part of the free speech movement at Berkeley back in the 60s, and they told me this week these are not even the same. They're totally different. Howard Dean said this, the protesters, these people in masks that were breaking windows, caused 6 figures of damage, over $100,000. These are the generation that will soon run America. They are not thugs and they oppose hate. They are children. Get used to it. The New York Times, though, to their credit, identified them as anarchists on the front page of their newspaper. So like I said, every now and then the New York Times, you got to give them props for it, because it's obvious, okay? It's sort of like saying the sun is in the sky during the day. But here's a discussion. So what do they do? I told you they project, right? So here's a discussion on CNN, and this is Robert Reich. You remember him? Was he like 4'2" or something? Labor secretary. I think he's 4'11" actually. Labor secretary from the Clinton administration. Now a professor at Berkeley. Okay, so here we go. Because he's never had to have a job in the real world. Okay, he's always been at Harvard or Berkeley. So here's an interview about the rioters.
But Mr. Reich, my first question to you is, there's a violence that we saw, this violence we saw at Berkeley, we had it live here on CNN last night. It ultimately it plays right into the hands of a right-wing white supremacist, someone like Milo Yiannopoulos.
It absolutely does, Don, and I'd want to be very, very clear. I was there for part of last night, and I know what I saw, and those people were not Berkeley students. Those were outsiders, agitators. I've never seen them before. There's rumors that they actually were right-wingers. They were part of a kind of a group that were organized and ready to create the kind of
projection,
tumult and danger you saw that forced the police to cancel the event.
Do you think this was a strategy by Yiannopoulos or right-wingers? They put this on so they could, in an effort to show or that, there's no free speech on a college campus like UC Berkeley?
I wouldn't bet against it, Don. I saw these people. They were they all looked almost paramilitary. They were not from the campus. I've heard, again, I don't want to say factually, but I've heard that there was some relationship there between these people and the right wing.
Okay, I'm doing a mercy ending that early because this is what they do, though. I don't have any facts, but I'm just saying it might be, okay? He's a leftist. The assumption is he's a liar. That's how it ought to work, okay? Don't pay attention to him. Expose him for what he is. So then they interviewed the mayor of Berkeley, who didn't want Milo Yiannopoulos to come. And I don't think, look, Milo he's gay, he's activist, he's provocative. I don't think he's a white supremacist. His boyfriend is black, okay? I'm just saying the facts kind of cut against claiming he's a white supremacist. And, pray for him, because, pray for these people. I thought his interview, you can look it up on Tucker Carlson, was pretty good. But here's the mayor of Berkeley who was very standoffish. But so now we know that we had these anarchists there, and we don't know who they are, do we? Why? Why don't we know who they were? They didn't arrest anybody. They stood on top of the building watching them. Oh, we got video of them. They all had masks on. You're not going to identify them. In fact, some of them, somebody pulled out the jacket and did a blow up, and guy had on a $675 leather jacket. It was a Marlon Brando thing from one of his movies, replication. So here's the mayor of Berkeley.
I do think our police did an incredible job under very difficult circumstances to minimize harm to people in the crowd.
Why do you say incredible job? There was $100,000 in damage. Fires were being lit. Doors were being smashed. ATMs were being broken. I don't see why that was an incredible.
The destruction of property is completely unacceptable, and but I am happy that more people weren't hurt.
What can be done about people who come into cities and are wearing masks?
There was a guy who had his head stomped in the middle of the street. You can see the video. There's a lady who was being interviewed by a news station. She was pepper sprayed while you stood there. There was another speaker at NYU the next night. He was pepper sprayed and then went ahead and gave his speech. So, well.
This has happened in Oakland.
Yeah.
This happens here in Berkeley. That's where things change. In the past, you could, have people taking pictures of people doing destruction and then find them and charge them. These people are wearing masks. I mean, what has any thought been given as to, okay, here they come, because you can tell that there they are, to isolate them or do something about them? Those are the people who seem to be wrecking stuff.
It's hard to know. I mean, these people.
Yeah, because you didn't arrest them.
Take advantage of large protests to come in, insert themselves into large crowds, to commit acts of destruction and violence. And there is security footage, to my understanding. Some of the businesses that were impacted, our police will be looking at that footage to
but
try
look at this footage right now. I mean, at what point, if I'm sitting there watching this, I'm like, why are they not being arrested?
That was on the UC Berkeley campus. A lot of what happened was actually on the UC Berkeley campus.
To begin with, and then they moved to city streets.
And where there was actually smashing of windows was actually in the city's jurisdiction. Right. But a lot of the activity was actually contained on the UC Berkeley campus. And I want to remind people that we did not, as a city, make the decision about inviting the speaker. We did not make the decision to cancel the speaker.
Okay, let's go fast forward.
He actually is...
So then why apologize?
Well, because, I think we probably shouldn't be using labels, but, he actually, I think, announced that he's going to be funding a scholarship for white men, and has said a lot of hateful things about women, about minorities, about Muslims. I think his speech, frankly, is hate speech, personally. But he does have a constitutional right to be heard. It's not the views that I believe in. It's not the views that the people of Berkeley believe in.
But as the leader of the city, would you open the doors to him again?
No, I would not.
You would not.
Oh,
clearly, because the response was violent and was.
Okay, enough of that. You can find the whole thing. So look at some of the signs there. Bash the fash. Trans dykes are good. Trump came out and said, it would be nice if this was the headline. Trump's questions funding after arrest. But that's not what I made that one up, okay? This is what the headline really said. Trump questions funding after unrest. And then The Economist comes out with this magazine cover, an insurgent in the White House with a Molotov cocktail. I'm telling you, folks, we are only 2 weeks and 2 days into this administration. You pray for safety of the administration, but you need to understand that it's going to be a very chaotic, bumpy time. It's just the way it's going to be. Because I think, look, everybody says, "Oh, we got a reprieve and all that." I don't believe that. Okay. I mean, some things may be reinstated, and we may have more freedom for a while to say. But I'm just telling you, is over half the country voted for you know who in this last election. It was only because the founding fathers had the good foresight to put in the Electoral College that Donald Trump is president. Okay, and so I'm just saying is we're past the tipping point. I don't see it going back. Absent a miraculous revival, I just don't see it happening. So pray for that and work towards that, but just understand, prepare your hearts and minds that it's going to get kind of rough and bumpy. It is. I don't know how else to say it. Rosa Brooks was a Pentagon political appointee in the Obama administration. And she came out with an article in Foreign Policy this week, 3 ways to get rid of President Trump before 2020. Okay, so she says, this is interesting. The world's biggest Muslim nation is Indonesia is telling its citizens to shut up about Trump. So there are essentially 4 ways to get rid of a crummy president. First, the world can just wait patiently for November 2020 to roll around, at which point American voters will presumably have come to their senses and be prepared to throw the bum out. I'm going 5 more minutes. But after such a catastrophic first week, 4 years seems like a long time to wait. This brings us to option 2, impeachment. Under the U.S. Constitution, a simple majority of the House of Representatives could vote to impeach Trump for treason, bribery, or other high crimes or misdemeanors. If convicted by the Senate on a 2/3 vote, Trump could be removed from office. And that's not going to happen. Okay? It's just not. Impeachments take time, months, she's right, even with an enthusiastic conference. But she says this, when you have a lunatic controlling the nuclear codes, even a few months seems like a perilously long time to wait. Why? Because he's legally insane, she says. You know, even though the American Psychological Association has said you can't, they tried this with Goldwater back in '64, that he was mentally unbalanced and shouldn't have the nuclear codes. They're doing it again, and psychologists are doing it in violation of what the American Psychological Association said that they shouldn't do. How long will it be before Trump decides that "you're fired" is a phrase that should be applied to nuclear missiles, aimed perhaps at Mexico? Some look at the 25th Amendment to the Constitution. These previously obscure amendments states that the Vice President and a majority of the principal officers of executive departments can declare the President unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, in which case the Vice President assumes the duties as acting President. This is option 3 for getting rid of Trump and appeal to Vice President Mike Pence's ambitions. Surely Pence wants to be president himself one day, right? Pence, unappealing as his politics may be to many Americans. And listen, if Pence was the president, guess what? They would be doing what? The exact same thing to him. Because he supported a Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And I was in Indiana in office on the Circle, right there near the Capitol, watching the protests going on in a meeting when this was going on. So this is the new threshold for plausibility in American politics, not actually insane. Oh, but her article says, headline says 3, but she has a 4th. The 4th possibility is one I recently would have said unthinkable in the United States of America: a military coup, or at least a refusal by military leaders to obey certain orders. And so she goes on to do this, and she talks about this military coup. For the first time in life, I can imagine plausible scenarios in which senior military officials might simply tell the president, "No, sir, we're not doing that," to the thunderous applause from the New York Times editorial board. And Der Spiegel, this is U.S. News, I'm sorry. This is U.S. News and World Report, temperament tantrum. They talk about how the psychologist, Trump is insane. He's mentally unbalanced, he's insane. Breitbart pointed out what Rosa Brooks said and said she said a military coup. You read her word. I read her words to you, verbatim from the article. And she immediately tweeted, "No, Trumpers, I did not call for a military coup. Read the column, not Breitbart, and read the whole column, not a sentence out of context." Der Spiegel built on this a little bit too. Trump is crazy. That's the cover of Der Spiegel magazine this week. Trump beheading the Statue of Liberty. Done by a Cuban-born and raised artist. The title of the article is Mephisto's Plan. Now, I'm not particularly adept at, here's what the translation of that thing says. Can Donald Trump rebuild the country into an autocracy? Resistance he rolls down as if he could change the whole world. He follows the ideas of his chief strategist, the populist Stephen Bannon, is now the most dangerous man in America. And this Mephistos, this comes from Faust. And Mephisto is essentially a stand-in for evil or the devil, I guess, is the shorthand way of looking at it. There's a park in Berlin that has it's a replication of the world. And so they have a landscape in one part of Vegas, and this is what they did. They erected a wall around it with barbed wire on the top of it. They put that up this week in Berlin, our ally Germany. Let's see if I have time to do this one. Okay, I think I need to quit. I'll try to put something up in the middle of the week to kind of get all this stuff. Listen, we live at a time of rapid change. I put up this graphic just to show this. I don't have time to talk about the Middle East and Israel and settlements and moving the embassy to Jerusalem and all this. Everything's in a state of flux right now. And this is a map of the new map of the Middle East. You know, because we pretend that there's still a country called Iraq. We pretend that there's still a country called Syria. We pretend that there's a country called Libya, and things have changed. Things are in a state of rapid change. They're in a state of flux. I don't think it changes. And there are people, all of these people behind the riots, all these people protesting the order, all these people protesting Israel, and Israel wanting to build settlements on its land, Israel wanting to do things with its holiest sites and calling them not part of Israel. These are all playing into the globalist New World Order agenda that will eventually rise. A man will arise as a little horn at first. And by little horn, I think it means that he might not be all that significant. Okay? So when I look at, I sort of have a rating thing. Like, okay, is that person a little horn yet? So I hear things about certain world leaders, and I'm like, now that guy's not a little horn. He's not even a nubbin on, you know, on the head of the beast. But that one world order and agenda will arise. We know it's going to happen. It may happen in our life. And all of the things are pushing towards that with all the chaos all over the world. So get your life in order, because all this end time stuff is getting ready to, I think, wrap up. And it could wrap up in fairly quick order. So thanks for staying over. Let's pray. Father, thanks so much for your word. Thanks for giving us a roadmap for what's going to happen in the end, so that we won't be distressed and we'll be able to say, yeah, that's what God predicted, and God is being glorified by being true to his word. Help us have that attitude, and to prepare our hearts, prepare our minds, and to share the gospel with those around us. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.